So, good morning, philosophers, friends of wisdom. The topic for my lecture today, as you can see, is defending truth in the post-truth era. And here are some references to my work related to this theme. In truth-likeness and in critical scientific realism, they reflect my background in Finnish analytic philosophy as a student of Jaakko Hintikka. The third one, Beauty, Truth and Justice, a collection of essays on culture, science and society, also reflects my background in the Finnish philosophy and influences from Jori Hendrik von Wright, and it tries to sort of support the idea that you can do systematic philosophy and what Rorty called edifying philosophy at the same time, so that they mutually are in interaction. And the concept of truth is a good example of this kind of problematic. So the plan or summary for the lecture is that I start from the ongoing philosophical debate about the definition of truth, a classical perennial philosophical topic. Then I briefly defend Tarski's semantic definition as an explication of the correspondence theory of truth. And then I make some remarks against relative notions of truth. And then I go to the so-called post-truth era, and in the end I raise the question, who lost the truth if we did so. So starting from the concept of truth and its significance in philosophy, as you all know. Now, truth is a fundamental concept of theoretical philosophy. Plato defined knowledge or knowledge that, episteme, Latin scientia, as justified true belief. Aristotle defined his concept of knowing why by arguments from true premises. So in both cases, the notion of knowledge depends on the notion of truth. And then the notion of logical consequence in the history of logic has been defined semantically as truth-preserving inference. And here again, logic depends on the notion of truth. And in philosophy of science, truth has regarded as an aim of science, and especially in critical scientific realism, it is claimed that truth is always, or truth claims are always uncertain. This is the fallibilism of Charles Peirce, but still the self-corrective method of science brings science closer to the truth, and therefore we need also some notion like truth-likeness, which indicates how close we have been in our investigation in truth. So we have a great variety of notions of truth which are still debated. We have the correspondence theory of truth as some kind of correlation or correspondence with facts, starting with Aristotle, medieval authors, and in modern times Russell and Wittgenstein presented outlines of this view. Then we have the coherence theory of truth as a consistent system or coherent system of ideas or beliefs supported by idealists like Hegel and then logical empiricists like Otto Neurath in the 30s. Then we have verificationist notions of truth as verification by sensations, at some time defended by Moritz Schlick in the 30s. We have the classical pragmatist theory of truth by William James. Truth is utility in pragmatic action. And then the consensus theory of truth defended by Habermas, truth as the consensus of some kind of ideal discourse community. and the task of the philosophers is to argue what is the best account of truth among these alternatives. So the correspondence theory of truth is based on the idea that truth is a relation between truth bearers, which are usually identified as indicative sentences or propositions or statements or beliefs, something related to language, and then truth makers, which are in reality, they are states of affairs, facts, situations, or structures in reality or the world. So truth is a language-world relation, and according to the correspondence theory, it is objective and it is independent of our beliefs and wishes. So whether some claim is true about the world depends on the claim itself and the world, and not our epistemic state. Now, traditional problems with this kind of correspondence account include how to characterize correspondence and how to speak about correspondence with unknown reality. And especially the coherence theorists like Neurath argued that sentences cannot be compared to reality, but only to other sentences. So truth is kind of internal notion among linguistic entities. And then one of the traditional debates has been whether we can distinguish between a definition of truth, telling what truth means, and indicators of truth, which tell how we can identify or know about truth. And the strategy of pragmatism has been to define truth by the notion of knowledge, by turning the Plato's definition upside down, and this was influenced by Peirce's methodological characterization of truth as the limit of inquiry, something like the ultimate opinion of the scientific community, which uses scientific method, and then the epistemic theories of truth defined truth as something like warranted assertability by John Dewey and Dummett, or consensus by this discourse community by Habermas, or ideal acceptability, as Putnam in his internal realism in the 1980s formulated it. The Marxist tradition had the slogan that practice is the criterion of truth. And here I interpret Marxism so that they have an objective notion of truth as correspondence, but then practice is the epistemic criterion for identifying truth. And then we also have, as one way of avoiding these philosophical problems, is the redundancy theory of truth, or deflationary theory of truth, saying that we don't need any definition of truth, and we can simply operate in a minimalist way with a notion without giving a formal definition. And this was influenced by Frank Ramsey in the 1920s. Now, my favorite author in the theory of truth is the Polish logician Alfred Tarski. And he studied in the University of Warsaw with logicians like Jan Łukasiewicz and Stanislaw Lesniewski, and philosopher Tadeusz Kotarbiński, and was influenced especially in his theory of truth by Kotarbiński's teachings. Tarski defended his PhD in 1924 and did sophisticated work in logic, and then he immigrated to the United States in 1939 and then stayed at the Department of Mathematics at the University of California, Berkeley, to the rest of his life. And Tarski published in 1933 in Polish his classical article on the concept of truth for formalized languages. It was translated into German in 1936. English translation is included in his Logic, Semantics and Meta-Mathematics in the 50s. But Tarski's semantic definition was announced in a conference in Paris in 1935 and became well known as a solution to the problem of truth ever since. And in the same year he published a classical article on logical consequence. A more popular version of his definition was given in a philosophical paper, The Semantic Concept of Truth and the Foundations of Semantics in 1944, and then the mature theory of what is called model theory in metamathematics was developed in the 1950s with Roger Watt. And in collected papers, all this stuff is then presented. Now, Tarski's approach to semantics was based on the idea that he wished to answer the question whether it is meaningful to speak about relations between language and mind-independent reality. And this was famously, this question was famously raised by Wittgenstein in Tractatus in 1922. Wittgenstein formulated the picture theory of language, but in the end he concluded that this kind of presentation is nonsense, and we cannot really speak about this kind of relation between language and world, and that influenced very much the early logical positivists like Rudolf Carnap, who thought that this kind of discussion would be metaphysical, and Carnap then proposed that we have syntactical statements about language, which can be expressed in the syntactical meta language. And this was Carnap's book on logical syntax in 1934. Now, Tarski's idea was that we can have a semantical meta language. So we have to distinguish the object language, where we have the primary truth bearers, the sentences or indicative sentences, and then we have a meta language which can speak about the relations of that object language and some extra linguistic reality or objects. And he also was influenced by the problem of the traditional liar paradox, and his argument showed that we are led to the liar paradox if we allow that the language itself can speak about the truth and falsity of its own statements. So, for example, if I say this sentence is false, then this leads to a well-known contradiction. If it is true, then it is false. If it is false, then it is true. So in order to avoid that, Tarski argued that we need semantically open languages where truth about the sentences in the object language is expressed in another language, which is the meta language for that language. So examples of such correspondences between object language sentences and some reality is that simple relational statement, John loves Mary, and then we have John refers to a person here and Mary refers to another person, and this is true if there is this loving relation between these two real persons. And a more complex statement, all ravens are black. We have the class of all ravens, which is here indicated by this blue circle, and that is a subset of the class of all black entities, which is here the black box, and this statement is true if the class of ravens is included in the class of all black objects. So these would be examples of that kind of treatment. Now, Tarski in his own early approach followed this Polish tradition by assuming that the object language is already an interpreted language. And that was something which was assumed by his teachers in logic. And he also followed Kotarbinsky's program of reism by avoiding notions like property, relation, universals, like redness, statements of affairs and facts, which usually and traditionally had been used in the definitions of or attempts to define correspondence theory of truth. But Tarski assumed that there is a class of all objects, and he then presented his definition of truth in terms of that. He gave a so-called recursive definition of truth for a formalized language which has a precise syntax. His example was calculus of classes and type theory, and that was interpreted in the class of all objects, here denoted by X star. And later in the article 1944, he applied this approach to natural language like fragments of English. And here one has to admit that Tarski's approach is a kind of program of explication. You can start from simple languages and define truth for them, and then extend it for more complicated cases. And but what is essential here is that truth is applied to complete sentences. So, for example, the statement that it is raining now is an incomplete sentence because it doesn't tell where and what is the moment of time. So the truth value of this kind of statement could vary depending on the context, and therefore the concept of truth has to be applied to specific sentences like it is raining in Helsinki on May 17, 2024, and you can see that this statement is false because it is not raining in Helsinki. But for logicians, this kind of extension of Tarski's definitions from the simple languages to more extensive fragments of English or other natural languages is an interesting task, and also to mathematical languages like in model theory. Now, Tarski's basic material adequacy condition for the definition of truth is his T equivalence stated here. X is true if and only if P, where X is a name of a sentence in the object language L, and P is the translation of this sentence in the meta language. And in the case where the object language is contained in the meta language, as in the natural language we could have, then we have a famous example that the sentence snow is white is true if and only if snow is white. So this is Tarski's basic condition. And then he proceeded to give this definition of truth in terms of satisfaction, and this is needed for the more complex sentences which include quantifiers like for every x or for some x. So we can say that an open formula Px is satisfied by an object A if and only if A has the property P. And then, or the formula Qxy is satisfied by the pair AB if and only if A is in relation Q to B. This was the example of John Love's Mary. And then we can go through the logical connectives like disjunction, conjunction, negation, and reduce their truth conditions to their constituents. And then we can say that existential statement, there is an X such that Px is true if some object A satisfies Px. And for all x Px is true if all objects A satisfy Px. And then a sentence without any free variables is true if it is satisfied by some sequence of objects, and that because there are no free variables, then it means that all sequences will satisfy it. So this is Tarski's formal definition, and as I see it, it's also his account of correspondence between statements and extra linguistic entities. Now, Tarski, when he gave this lecture on semantics in Paris in 1935, he also met in the same year the leading exponents of new movements of exact philosophy, Carnap and Karl Popper, and convinced both of them on the possibility of giving a semantic definition of truth. But Tarski's early article 33 also included a notion that truth could be relativized to some restricted class of objects. So instead of speaking of all objects, we could have a smaller domain X and then ask whether some statement is true relative to that smaller domain. And then in the definitions here, when you say some object or all objects, you have to restrict the choice of the object for the restricted class. And this relativized notion of truth was needed by Tarski in his 1935 definition of logical consequence, saying that the sentence A follows from a class K of sentences if every model of the class K is also a model of the sentence A. This is the idea of truth-preserving inference, and this is against some commentators like Wilfried Hodges, who said that Tarski did not have this kind of model theoretical notion in the 1930s, but I think you can find it in Tarski's especially Tarski's paper on logical consequence. Then Carnap, I think, improved Tarski's presentation in the sense that, as I said, Tarski followed the Polish tradition by assuming that the language is interpreted. So every term, every name and predicate, every relation has already a fixed interpretation. And he did not tell how this interpretation is made, or did not make it explicit. But Carnap, in his Introduction to Semantics, 1942, made this interpretation explicit by what he called designation function. So a designation function maps individual constants like names to some elements of the domain. John is the name of a person, real person John in the domain. From predicates to properties or classes of elements, the class of ravens would be mapped to, the term raven would be mapped to a designated class of objects, the ravens, etc. And this was Carnap's kind of new technical improvement, and this was adopted in the mature model theory in 1950s, where in model theory you have syntactically uninterpreted object language, L, and then you have an interpretation function, I, which maps this syntax to a model M. and then we have the relation that the sentence x of L is true in a model M via the interpretation I. So in that sense, Carnap's contribution was important also to the later development of this theory. Now, there has been debate about the status of Tarski's definition and his intentions, but I think he made it clear that he intended his definition as an explication of what he called the traditional Aristotelian notion of truth as correspondence. And he clearly defended the notion of material truth in the actual world and logical truth, which is truth in all models or possible worlds. And he also made clear that definition of truth should be distinguished from epistemic indicators of truth, like the pragmatists are proposing. But we have a lively debate about Tarski's definition among analytic philosophers and philosophical logicians, and I will here consider a couple of potential objections to Tarski's approach. Now, the first objection is that, or claims that Tarski's account expresses only a relation between object language and meta-language, so that it is merely what Quine called disquotational. It is not the language-world relation, but relation of object language and meta-language, and that also would mean that the T equivalencies would, like the sentence snow is white is true if and only snow is white are trivial tautologies. Now the reply is that that this T equivalence is only an adequacy condition for Tarski. It is not Tarski's whole definition, as I tried to show, and what it expresses it is a relation between the language L and the rest of the world. So the language itself is part of the world in the sense that it includes syntactical objects, and then this T expresses a relation of these linguistic entities to other entities in the world, and it is a fact of English that snow means, the term snow means snow, and in German, Schnee means also snow. So this is the first objection. The second objection is that Tarski's definition does not mention any entities like facts as truth makers to which truth tendencies might correspond. This was Davidson's objection, or that the truth sentences are satisfied by all sequences and thus do not correspond to any of these. This was Susan Haag's objection. And here the reply is that satisfaction is a relation between language and objects, but truth makers should not be sought among these sequences which are needed for the concept of satisfaction, but rather in model theory, truth is relative to structures, which are collections or compositions of facts. So there are objects, sets, relations among these objects, and they are the real truth makers, not these sequences, which is a technical trick to give the notion of satisfaction. The third objection is that the application of model theory presupposes something like what Hilary Putnam called metaphysical realism, the assumption that the actual real world has mind-independent structure. and Putnam's internal realism was against this kind of assumption. Now, my reply is that model theory can be applied both to human-made structures like mathematical structures, but also that the scientific realist need not assume that the world itself has a ready-made structure, but instead each language and interpretation specifies a version of the world, which is the world relative to that language and interpretation, and this is the actual world relative to the language L, and actual truth in such world versions or structures is precisely Tarskian truth about that structure. And the fourth objection is that Tarski fails to note that truth is not a purely semantic concept, but depends on reality. This was argued by the Finnish philosopher Erik Stenius, and the truth is in a conceptual word version is trivial. This was advanced by the Polish logician Jaroslav Peregi. Now, I think we have to accept some kind of conceptual pluralism which says that there is no ideal language, so that the world itself would be a structure relative to that language. Instead, we have different languages which all try to capture some aspects of the world, and all these conceptual frameworks have their own truths. Still, truth is objective in the sense that we choose the language and interpretation, and the world decides the truth values of the sentences in this language. In this sense, truth is objective, and it is non-trivially true about the world itself. And relativism is avoided since the truths about different world versions cannot be incompatible with each other because they don't express our perhaps conflicting beliefs about the world, but what the world is like relative to this linguistic description that we give about them. Now, after defending Tarski's account, I will say something about the notion of relative truth. In the history of philosophy, we have a long debate started by the ancient skeptics, which claimed that knowledge about truth is impossible. That was the skeptic Gorgias, or that there is no difference between knowledge and error, and therefore we have to suspend judgment about everything. And then we have relativists who argued that each human individual has his or her own truths. This is one interpretation of the homo mensura doctrine of Protagoras, or that truth is relative to persons, communities, cultures, beliefs, or paradigms, like in modern philosophy of science, claimed by Kuhn, Feyerabend, the Edinburgh School, David Bloor. But if you take seriously the idea that truth for a person could be defined something like this person believes that P. So P is true for A means that A believes that P. Then this notion can be formally defined, but it would not satisfy any of the traditional conditions for truth, and in particular, it would not satisfy Tarski's T equivalence, which was his adequacy condition for any attempt to define truth. Then we have the perspectivist school represented by Nietzsche's famous statement that there are no facts but only interpretations, and Foucault's treatment of the regimes of truth, or how power produces knowledge, and in that sense truth is something which limits our freedom. And then we have the postmodern postmodernist school from Heidegger, Lyotard, Derrida, Baudrillard to Rorty, neo-pragmatists like Rorty, which are indifferent to objective truth altogether and point out difficulties in that sense. So we have here many different schools which challenge the tradition of or the idea of objective truth, or and in particular the correspondence theory of truth. And this is reflected in what is now called the post-truth era. And here I come to the contemporary relevance of this debate on the notion of truth. The journal The Economist named post-truth as the word of the year 2016. So what happened in 2016? We had the Brexit referendum, we have Donald Trump's election as the President of the United States, and we had all kinds of examples of spread of misinformation, false messages, and disinformation, intentional lies by politicians, by journals, by social media, by artificial intelligence algorithms. We had all kinds of conspiracy theories, and even so not only politics and media were full of these lies and misinformation, but even in economics, car factories deceived their customers on the carbon emissions of their products. And it has been evaluated that Trump expressed false or misleading claims 30,587 times during his presidency, which means 21 per day. It has been estimated that by a EU Commission or committee that Putin's Russia sent 15,000 public lies between 2014 and 21, and many more have been added after the illegitimate attack on Ukraine in 2022, sort of showing the validity of the old slogan that the first casualty of war is truth. And in the contemporary discussion we have notions like fake news, alternative facts, what Frankfurt called bullshit, which means total ignorance about the distinction between truth and falsity, simply jargon without paying attention to any dimension like truth and falsity. And what is alarming is that this is not only happening in totalitarian regimes. This was famously anticipated by George Orwell's novel 1984, where there is the big brother who follows all citizens, and eventually they admit that 2 + 2 is 5. So they were ready to modify well-known truths. But it also happens in liberal democracies like the Western countries, like the United States. Now, some commentators have argued that this kind of talk about the post-truth era is misleading. and have pointed out that lying or spreading misinformation and disinformation is as old phenomenon in the history of humankind as we have any other cultural features, and in a sense it is true. Lying has a long history, and we know that already in the law of Moses in the Old Testament there is the eighth commandment, which says that you should not give false pronouncement about your neighbor. We have an early discussion of the liar paradox, even before Plato and other classical Greek philosophers. So lying was a well-known phenomenon in that culture, and we have a long discussion about errors and lying as a sin, like Thomas Aquinas said, and also discussion about the possibility of giving small white lies, which are innocent lies, which are not mortal sins. And then we have today we have the phenomena like deep fake products of AI, where it is very difficult to distinguish between true representation and false representation. So given this long history, the virtue of honesty was important for classical Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. It was an absolute demand in Kant's ethics. You are not allowed to lie in any circumstances, and it is an important ethical principle in the for responsible journals and also in scientific research, that you cannot produce false news or fabricate your evidence and produce false claims in science. So in that sense there was never a golden age of truth telling, so where everyone would be speaking truth. But I think the notion of post-truth era is relevant in the sense that truth as a normative ideal has been typical of the tradition of the Enlightenment, and this period, which we now call post-truth era, is a challenge or erosion of that ideal. And very recently, the World Economic Forum classified different great risks of our time, and they stated that misinformation and disinformation are the greatest risks of our time. And this is related to the grand theme, which was also pronounced for this philosophical Olympiads, the relation of authoritarianism and democracy. It is clear that this kind of erosion of the notion of truth might be fatal to the democratic ideals in our society. Now, finally, we may ask then, how did it happen? Who then lost the truth? And of course, there are many different aspects and backgrounds. There, populist politics is a reaction to globalization, digitalization, to internet, social media, and distrust in authorities and scientific expertise. and with this kind of atmosphere, we have also also visible the threat to the notion of truth. But I think philosophers should also look in the mirror and to see what is their responsibility for the concept of truth. And here I could refer to two phenomena. One is the so-called science wars in the 1990s, which was a debate between scientific realists who defended the idea that truth is an important goal of science, and then the opponents who represented various kinds of relativist positions, included Bruno Latour, who has later stated that he never really wanted to threaten the epistemic authority of science in terms of his social constructivism. Then we have the role of postmodernism, and philosophers like Daniel Dennett have argued that the postmodernists have to be blamed for the present situation. But of course, I think it is clear that political leaders who advocate this kind of approach to lying and fake news have never read any philosophical texts, but somehow they seem to adopt some very vulgar notions of truth. And Sami Pihlström, the Finnish philosopher who himself defends pragmatism, has been worried whether the pragmatist identification of truth and useful could have been also influential in the slippery slope from James and Rorty to Trump. And I think Trump is representing a kind of negative version of the pragmatist theory of truth. So anything which is harmful to him is false. It is or fake news. So in that sense, falsity and harmful are identified in that concept. So in that sense, I think we philosophers should think about our potential role in influencing the social phenomena like the post-truth era. And what we need today are methods of fact-checking. We have to support responsible journalism and scientific research. We need education of critical thinking and media literacy. And we also need a clear analysis and defense of the objective notion of truth. So this is my message or my thesis for you, this audience. So thank you.
Many thanks, Professor Niiniluoto. If there are any questions in the audience, please raise your hand. So.
Hi. So I'd like to ask a question about one of the example sentences that you gave concerning whether it's raining or not in Helsinki on May 17th, 2024. So I don't know exactly how big Helsinki is, but I assume it's a pretty large city. Even if you look outside, we see it's not raining. We go on the streets, we can see further away, we see it's not raining. But somewhere around the edge of the city, it might be raining. We can't see it, we can't know it.
Yeah.
Let's suppose it is slightly raining in like 1 meter before the city limits. What would then Tarski's model say about that sentence, it's raining in Helsinki on May 17, 2024? Because it seems like the sentence is both true and false at the same time. But maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe you can elaborate on that. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Well, this is a relevant question. If you if you say it is raining, that is very open sentences because it doesn't tell when and where, and then you can specify the moment of time and the place. And I was using this example again with somewhat broad indicators like the day. I think you could ask the same question if it's not raining in the morning, but it is raining in the evening. So then you might want to more specific time index there, and also the place. It is if you say it is raining in Finland, then certainly it might be raining just now in Lapland, but not in any place in Helsinki. So you could go on to have more precise regions where you describe that. But I think the most perhaps the most natural interpretation of that sentence which I gave is that if somewhere in Helsinki it is raining, then it would be false. If you say that no, it is raining in Helsinki, would mean that if there is some region in Helsinki, then it is true. Okay.
Thank you for the wonderful lecture and the wonderful summary of the theories of truth. I would like to ask one question regarding the last sentence there of the defense of the objective notion of truth.
Yeah.
Why is it that in order to fight post-truth, we need something more than the epistemic theories? Why not join forces, you and Dammit and Putnam and so forth together? Because what we are fighting, assuming that we are fighting, I assume that we are fighting the same cause, and we don't need the objective correspondence notion of truth in order to do it.
Yeah, thanks. Good question. So how strong notion of truth you need to defend the status of objective journalism or objective media to objective science, etc. So I think that the part of the answer is in the second paragraph there. That if you have these weaker notions of truth, like relativist notions or pragmatist notions, there is this slippery slope to allowing too much to this opponent side. So in that sense, using these alternative notions of truth easily then leads to the phenomena that are dangerous for in this post-truth era. So that would be my pragmatic answer. Yes. Yes.
Thank you for your...
But also we have this objective notion of truth, so why don't defend it?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Thank you for your splendid lecture. The lecture is very, very important and useful for us. I have a question. Are you agree to add something to the last point, in the sense that we can follow the example of Dante. Dante needs a Virgilius. That means somebody with authority, because we live not only in the world with facts, but also with values. And about values, it's very difficult to check which values are higher or not. And in this case, the history shows us that we needed persons like great philosophers who are our helper in our life. That is my question. Would you agree to need philosophers who are our Virgilius in our life? Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I have not compared philosophers to Virgilius, but that is a complicated question because we we have different views about value statements, whether they have truth values or not, and many analytic philosophers have been non-cognitivists in the sense that value statements are not true or false because they express some kind of ideal goals and not correspond to any facts, and that has been the reason for some philosophers to extend these concepts of truth, like Habermas used his consensus theory so that it can be applied to value statements and normative statements. So that is one issue there. And I'm inclined to be a non-cognitivist about value statements. But at the same time, I would support the idea that truth itself is a very important value in society, and that is the message here, that this normative ideal of truth coming from the Greek tradition and the Enlightenment is an important part of the historical development of philosophy, and it should be cherished. So in that sense, value considerations are very important, and truth is among these important values.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to extend the question of Ivan, because if we describe this scheme of truth on the relation between world and description of the world, the model of Tarski, isn't better applicable to prescriptive language than to descriptive language? Because prescriptive language is closed. We can fix it with our own preconditions. But descriptive language has also meta conditions which we do not control. And that is, it's easier for us to build a system of truth around prescriptive conditions. That was just the first remark. The second is, if we go 700 years back and we follow the correspondence theory of truth in its origins, in its medieval origins, as adequatio rei et intellectus, you spoke also about reism, then can we be helped in our research with the discussion between realism and nominalism, which developed in that time in order to describe what is truth or not? And the last question is, if we start with the Greek term, which is not positive, truth is a positive term, but the Greek term is a skeptical term. It is aletheia, which is the non-mistaken. So all what is not mistaken remains as the possibility of truth. So lethe is forgetfulness, and lathos in Greek is mistake. And a is the not. So if we take this construction, which is a linguistic conception of what is the possibility of truth, then we have it already in the word as such. And if we start there, we can say that a skeptical approach in what can be true would be possible.
Yeah, very, very interesting historical questions which show how fascinating this history of the concept of truth is. So I agree, and the idea of truth as aletheia, as something which is not hidden or not covered but revealed. That was used by Heidegger in his account of truth. It is not. It is different from the correspondence theory of truth, because correspondence theory is related to the idea that language is a representation of the world, not something which so the truth is revealed if you remove the attempt to represent it. So in that sense, it belongs to a different tradition. This distinction between nominalism and realism is certainly relevant. Charles Peirce, who has an important role in the theory of truth, moved to a kind of what he calls scholastic realism in his account, but I think that is especially important when to the questions when you try to extend the notion of truth from ordinary descriptive sentences to modal sentences like possibilities, necessities, and this is something that was done in the tradition of Finnish philosophy by von Wright and Hintikka, in especially Hintikka's possible world semantics. Hintikka and Kripke and others extended the notion of modal theoretical truth to modal sentences, and there the question about nominalism and realism appears. But for ordinary descriptive sentences, I think one could say that Tarski was a nominalist, not a realist in the medieval sense. But then the prescriptive sentences are already related to that problem, whether value statements or normative statements have truth values. And von Wright, who is most famous for his logic of norms and deontic logic, he was always skeptical about the idea that normative statements would have truth values.
Yeah.
Except in the descriptive sense, that if you say that stealing is forbidden in Finland, it is a kind of normative statement. It can be understood in the normative sense, descriptive sense, that in the Finnish legal system we have prescribed that stealing has to be punished by courts. So in that sense it would have a truth value. And such extension of the notion of truth can be defended, I think, along the Tarskian lines of correspondence.
You actually answered the question about prescriptive truths. I
Yeah.
wanted to actually address the idea of integrity, because I think in one sense when we talk about truth, the intentional or the modal logic of possible worlds is, one is at time T1 I say I'm coming to the room, and at time 2 I actually perform that act in the world, and then at the end at T3 I say I have come into the room. So there are 3 temporal phases of the truth telling or integrity or keeping your word kind of thing. And I think in Indian philosophies they bothered more about that. You can call it pragmatic, but it's not pragmatic as much as it is the reverse of making a sentence true in the real world. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is the Indian philosophies have handled the idea of truth in a very strange way, because there's a very rich theory of error, Akhyativada. Both in all kinds, in epistemic and pragmatism, there is a theory of error which is richly tied to the logician school. And I think modern philosophers are taking pieces of Jaina logic, because that talks about vantage point truths, and also the Nyaya theory of error checking rather than truth checking, which is, if there's error, then it's the non-truth. It is not the truth, but it's the non-truth. So that's an interesting thing to think about, how we can look at Tarski's or the future modal logic and interpret it in terms of this other kind of interpretation of error theories rather than just truth theories. Thank you.
Thank you. This is this example of action and its different dimensions is an example of the program of explicating truth for more complex situations. So you have statements which describe motion or change, and then you have logic, temporal logics, which have to account this kind of fact that you can divide actions in different stages, and where truth is limited to in these descriptions is a relevant questions. But the theory of error is of course very interesting, and in my book Truth Likeness I comment some of the traditional notions of error, and I think there was a mistake which was repeated many times in the history of philosophy, that there was a failure to distinguish error in the sense of ignorance, of not having complete knowledge, and then error in the sense of making a mistake. And that was exemplified by some medieval authors and also by 19th century Hegelians. So if I said that the rose is red, then it was argued that is an error because it doesn't give a complete description of that rose, because it also has green leaves, and therefore it is an error. It only has a degree of truth, but the modern notion of truth likeness, I think is not based on that idea, even though it measures closeness to complete truth. But the notion of error is then attributed to those situations where you make a real mistake. If you have a red rose and you say that it is, let's say, yellow, that would be an example of a real error.
Please join me in thanking Professor Niiniluoto.
Okay.